Okay, let's get started. It's 12 noon. We can mute the music. Thanks, Davia. All right, good afternoon, delegates, alternates, members, and staff. I'm Megan Dayton, MAPE's statewide president. Welcome to a forum to discuss the resolutions that were submitted for consideration at MAPE's 2020 Delegate Assembly on Saturday. This is our third and final forum, and this is the first year that MAPE has convened a forum to discuss resolutions on a statewide audience before Delegate Assembly. Special thank you to Region 6 Director Tabitha Reese-Miller for proposing the idea, and thanks to staff for making it happen. Joining me here today are Lynn Butcher, our statewide secretary, who is sharing her screen, and the chief authors of the resolutions. Staff are also here to help out if needed. Let's go to the agenda. The agenda for today is pretty straightforward. First, I'll give a brief presentation on how the Zoom webinar will work today. This will be followed by presentations by the chief authors and their answers to questions or concerns you submit. As a reminder, you can find all of these resolutions on the portal or on the website. The authors will present in this order: Tabitha Reese-Miller, 1, 2, 3, and 4. John Ferrara will be number 5. Either Chris Smith or Amy Mueller will be 6. John Ferrara again will be 7, and Kay Pedretti will be 8 and 9. Our time is limited, so let's get started. Excuse me. We'll start with a few tips on using the Zoom webinar. First, at the bottom of your screen, you'll find the webinar control panel. If you can't see it, hover your cursor over the bottom of the screen, and the panel should appear or disappear. In this panel, you should see several different icons. On the far left, there is the audio icon where you can control your audio. Your microphone is automatically muted and must be unmuted by staff first before you can unmute yourself. In the middle of the control panel, there is a Q&A icon. This is where you will type when you wish to ask a question or state a concern you might have. As a friendly reminder, we are not here to debate the merits of resolutions. And so in the interest of time, please only submit questions or concerns you would like responded to by the primary authors of each resolution. To ask a question, please enter the following into the Q&A box. First, your name, also your local, and then a summary of your question. Another friendly reminder that questions and concerns that are submitted anonymously will not be recognized, so please make sure to at least submit your first and last name. So let's get started with presentation number 1. I see Tabitha here. Tabitha, go ahead and unmute yourself. If you could introduce yourself, please, and then give us your presentation on resolution number 1.
Sure. I'm Tabitha Reese-Miller. I am regional director for Region 6. I work for Minnesota State System Office as a research analyst, and I have been involved in various types of leadership roles within MAPE going on a decade now. I've served as a steward and chief steward, and I also presently serve on the statewide meet and confer team for Minnesota State. So this first resolution here is really just to sort of clean up some language in the judicial procedure and judicial committee bylaws. It is to kind of soften language, take away things that are often used within criminal proceedings, and attempt to remove any intimidating terms that are presently in the articles of these two bylaws, or these two articles of the bylaws. So the types of language that are being changed is the word charge is being changed to complaint. An accuser is being changed to complaint, and accused is being changed to respondent. References to confronting complainants are being removed. Terms like cross-examine are being changed to question. And then in reading through and reviewing these two articles, I noticed that there's a reference to Article 12 that really should have been Article 13. So not a whole lot of substantive change in this particular resolution. Those will come in the subsequent resolutions. This is just really trying to improve the language of Article 12 and 13.
Okay, thanks, Tabitha.
Sure.
I'll just give a brief pause. I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but if anyone has any questions on resolution number 1, go ahead and submit them. You can type in your questions while the chief author is presenting as well. So I'm still not seeing any questions, so let's move on to resolution number 2 when you're ready.
Sure. So resolution 2, 3, and 4 are all kind of interrelated, and so they need to kind of be considered in that particular order. The resolution 2 is focused on clarifying what process should be used for what types of complaints. There has been a history within MAPE of complaints being filed in various different informal formats. There's been some confusion about what the correct type of process should be used to hear and resolve complaints. And so the function of this particular resolution is to specify that the kinds of complaints that the judicial procedure addresses is the only procedure that should address those complaints, and that there aren't these like auxiliary types of ways of addressing the similar complaints. In the past, some individuals would just go directly to someone on the executive committee or the executive director, and complaints could have been handled unofficially. In some cases, those complaints involved resolutions involved hiring outside investigators, and so money was being used, and there was question about whether or not they were official complaints or unofficial complaints, and so there's just a lot of confusion. So this is trying to clear up that confusion and specify one process for handling complaints. Right now, the judicial procedure actually does state one type of complaint that we want to remove from this particular article. It does allow for complaints of policy violations, and we want to move those to a different particular article because we think that there's some differences, and I kind of will get to that when I talk about that resolution, that would be better addressed in a whole separate article. So that would leave the kind of violations in the judicial procedure to those that are more severe, things like embezzling or intentionally harming our organization in some way. So I think that's pretty much the gist of this resolution. Oh, and at the back of this resolution, we've also added an appendix, much like the election rules contains, that details the timeline for the judicial process. Right now, the timelines are all embedded specifically within the particular sections of the articles that are relevant. And so if you actually want to just kind of see the whole, if you want to kind of know what the timeline is, you have to like search through the whole article. So this is just an easy reference, so you can kind of see each step of the way of the judicial process.
Okay, thank you. I'm still not seeing any questions in the chat, so perhaps folks are waiting for all 4 of the first resolutions to come through. So let's move on to number 3, please.
Sure. So resolution number 3 addresses particularly the type of complaint that, again, was removed from the current language of the judicial procedure. So presuming that article passes, then this resolution will be considered. If for some reason the policy and governing documents violation remains in the judicial procedure, that would make this particular resolution irrelevant, and so wouldn't be considered. So just kind of understanding what, or some other potential changes might need to get made in order for the two things to align. So it depends on what resolution happens to resolution 2 as to what will go on with resolution 3. The purpose of this resolution is to create a whole new article in the bylaws that addresses specifically policy and governing documents violations. The reason for that is these type of complaints need to be handled on a sort of shorter timeline than what the judicial process allows. The judicial process is a very long process, can be multiple months, and it also involves a hearing committee of 12 people, and the lost time for all of those individuals participating in the process. It can be rather costly. And when there is a violation of a policy or governing document, a lot of times those results need to be decided on a shorter timeline so that the organization can kind of get back on track and continue heading in the right direction. And so this resolution specifically shortens that timeline so that a decision should be made within 1 month. The hearing committee is a smaller group of individuals, and it's constructed a little differently. So we have recommended that the hearing committee, those who hear the violations of governing documents, would be constructed on a rotating basis of local presidents. We thought that made sense because local presidents tend to have a little bit more knowledge about governing documents than your average member, but they also tend to focus mostly on issues within their local, and therefore wouldn't necessarily be aware of issues outside of their local, and therefore would have less bias and more impartiality in hearing complaints of violations of policy or governing documents. We also recommended that the chair of the hearing committee would be a member of the Constitutional Rules Committee. The rationale for that was that the Constitutional Rules Committee, being in some ways stewards of our governing documents, would have some subject matter expertise in that arena and could give some good advice to the local presidents sitting on the hearing committee. And they would not necessarily, they wouldn't be serving as a voting member, but simply to conduct the proceedings and then provide guidance to the hearing committee.
Okay, we've got one question here from Sally Wakefield. Is there an example of a judicial process of what type of issues the judicial committee considers? I'm unfamiliar with their work and some context would be useful.
Yeah, so it's helpful to know in both of these. So I mirrored the judicial procedure of Article 13 in developing this proposal for a new article in our bylaws. So they're similar in a lot of ways. The idea behind the hearing committee is that this is not a standing committee, but mostly serves much like a jury, right? So individuals are selected for that committee when it's necessary to convene, and the committee is dissolved as soon as that particular set of issues has been resolved. So these are not individuals who will be meeting on a regular basis or anything like that. By doing that, you actually allow for a greater impartiality because these members can't be like lobbied in advance because people know who they are and can attempt to try to sway them before they get to the actual hearing of the issue. So Lynn, I don't know if it's possible if you go back to resolution number 2 and show the judicial policy or the judicial procedure. There is a list in there of what the type of complaints are. Embezzlement is one of them. Intentionally trying to harm the union is another one that I can specifically speak to. Like working with an outside organization to try to dissolve our union would be one of the things. So there are types of very damaging, fairly sort of high importance type of violations. Whereas one of those things that are currently in there that feels very different from the others is a policy violation or a violation of governing documents of MAPE. And so that's kind of why we're taking this and trying to put it into a different article. So another thing to mention is that, you know, the judicial procedure, I think, has only been used one other time in MAPE's history, a very long time ago. It's not been used in any type of, hasn't been used until this last election cycle, where there was a number of issues that kind of transpired around the elections. And there was actually 2 outstanding judicial complaints that are moving through the judicial process presently. We would also include a proviso that those complaints would still get handled under the current articles as written. So any changes that would be adopted on Saturday would not impact the current proceedings. I didn't include that proviso initially because I didn't anticipate that they would still be outstanding at this point. But because they are, we would want to make sure that that is clear.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, so we can move on to resolution number 4.
So resolution number 4's purpose is to align the election rules with the change in the judicial procedure and the newly created policy, or the newly created bylaws for policy and governing documents violations. This language, and I'm going to get this right the 3rd time, since now I've done this twice already, and I wrote these back in July. The language here in the resolution actually states that currently it's aligned to follow the judicial procedure, and if the proposed article for policy and governing documents violations is adopted, then this particular resolution will be amended to reference that new article rather than the judicial procedure. So there are some substantive changes within the election rules just beyond kind of changing the process. First, as someone who actually utilized the election rules sort of violation complaint process this past election cycle, I can tell you that there were a number of ways in which the election rules fell short. One of those is that an individual who knows of an elections violation doesn't necessarily have individual stake in the game when it comes to resolving that. The individuals, election rules are really meant to make sure that there is a fair election process. And so if there's a violation of the election rules, that is equally affecting all members of MAPE and not just the individual who brought forth the evidence or the complaint of a violation. So the role of what I'm calling the whistleblower would simply be to raise a flag that there might be some particular issue. And then the elections committee would then take over and gather some evidence and conduct an investigation and make a determination as to whether or not that complaint was substantiated. There is language in there for the whistleblower. If the election committee does not substantiate the complaint, that whistleblower can go to the board of directors and kind of present a case about why they felt the elections committee didn't do a sufficient job in investigating the complaint. And so the board of directors could then make some determination on that. If the elections violation is substantiated by the elections committee, the elections committee would, at that point, would become the complainant, and they would take over the case and present that case to a hearing committee. So the language presently, again, states that it would be handled under the judicial procedure. And again, the reason for that is we want, a very clear path about how complaints are heard. We don't want sort of various different pathways for complaints to get heard. That way it's because that's confusing and feels inequitable. The ideal scenario would be that these complaints are actually handled under a newly adopted article specifically for policy complaints. So they become the elections committee would then become the complainant and present that information to a hearing committee where the respondent, the subject of the complaint, would also be present and make a case to the hearing committee. The hearing committee then would make a decision about whether or not there needs to be a remedy in place, whether that's any kind of censure, or if they're, eliminating somebody as a candidate, or what that might be. One of the issues that kind of came up in this last elections committee is, I think, both the elections committee felt sort of in a difficult situation, serving as the essentially a prosecutor and the jury in terms of an elections complaint. There was a lot of pressure put on that committee to make a determination about what to do in a situation where there's an elections violation, and as a consequence felt targeted. And I think on the other side of that, the respondent felt like the elections committee had way too much power in the process, and that there wasn't a separation of those powers in a way that allowed for a more equitable process. So I think in this particular case, this process both eliminates some of that pressure from the elections committee and makes it feel like there's an opportunity for a additional group of individuals to make a determination about what should happen if there is a violation. So I think that is pretty much the nuts and bolts of this fourth resolution. Sorry, I should mention that once the hearing committee would make a determination, so if the complaint is substantiated and the elections committee does bring forth a case to the hearing committee, there is a way for the respondent then to appeal that decision to the board of directors if they still feel at that point that there was some piece that got missed in the committee process, or that the outcome wasn't fair.
Okay, thanks, Tabitha.
Sure.
I am not seeing any questions in the chat. So just a reminder that those resolutions are available on the website, also on the portal. If you have follow-up questions, feel free to contact the chief authors. And if there's language that you want to work on for an amendment ahead of time, you are encouraged to do so. Okay, so we will move on to, looks like Amy Mueller is here. Well, yeah, there. Amy Mueller is here. 1 second. There we go. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I skipped John Ferrara. I think I'm on lunch brain here. Let's go to John Ferrara for resolution number 5. Sorry, John.
No worries. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. So number 5 comes from a couple different places. I think it's no surprise that we have several chief stewards who want more resources devoted towards enforcement. And in discussing this and in a conversation with one of the chief stewards, it was mentioned that the starting point might be that if we want to devote more resources towards enforcement, then let's make chief stewards, which is a regional office, similar to regional directors, and that they just hold that position. This resolution is endorsed and was passed by both the organizing and political councils. One of the things our councils have seen as we've tried to organize and do different work around the state is that when we have members who hold multiple positions, that while that may keep the train running, so to speak, it constrains growth and it constrains leadership. And so this resolution is designed to address a couple of those things by requiring chief stewards to only hold that position. It'll allow them to focus on building enforcement capacity, and it will increase our democracy by bringing more people to the table, more voices being heard, more opinions and points of view getting considered, and fewer people monopolizing positions. Now, I understand there's some certain controversy about this resolution. We may need to divide it up. We may need to change the proviso to make it take effect at the next regularly scheduled election cycle, so it's not to disrupt stuff. But as a member from Greater Minnesota, I know it's difficult to get every position filled, and it takes some work, and it takes some pain, and it takes some things being left open for a little while. But in the end, I more and more as I hold different roles in MAPE, I see the benefit to striving to fully fill out leadership rosters. So that's what this one's about.
Great, thanks, John. Kay Pedretti, Region 20 Chief Steward, says the language you present does limit chief stewards in 6 different ways. The 6 not statements in the resolution, not create additional opportunities. The resources needed does not begin with limiting chief stewards. We need more enforcement agents. The more we limit chief stewards, the more they and others will drop membership. It's becoming a trend that leaders are dropping. Reminder that we are not debating the merits of these resolutions here. You can express concerns, get answers to questions, but we're not debating. Are there any other questions on resolution number 5? Okay, thanks, John. Okay, now I think I'm on track. Amy Mueller, if you could introduce yourself and give us a presentation on resolution number 6, please.
Great. Thank you, Megan, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Mueller. I am the Co-Deputy Chief Steward for Local 401. I'm here on behalf of Chris Smith, who is the primary author of this resolution. Just a little bit about me. I've worked for Revenue for almost 10 years, and I am a lead tax collector for the state. I'll be talking about today changing the word limit on candidate personal statements. The intent is to make it 300 limit for all positions under the Article 5, campaign conduct and personal statements. Like I said, on Saturday, it's very straightforward, and there were no questions there, but I hope there are today.
Thanks, Amy. Tim Jenkins writes, was there thought to having more accountability built in lieu of restricting activity? And I think that's a question back for John.
Sure.
So I'll leave that one open, and then John can tackle that one when he comes back for the next resolution. Are there any questions for Amy on resolution number 6? Okay, I guess there are no questions. Amy, thanks for your presentation and for you and Chris bringing this resolution forward.
Great, thank you.
Okay, on to resolution number 7. John, feel free to unmute yourself again. From Tim Jenkins, that would be great. I can reread it again if you'd like.
Please read it again.
Sure. Was there thought to having more accountability built in lieu of restricting activity?
When it comes to steward and chief steward positions, much of a bunch of that is contractually defined, so it limits how we can do that. I think I often ask people the question: if your chief steward or officer was able to quit today, and there was no one prepared to take over that role and that individual is holding multiple roles, then that's a sign that that increase in opportunity and focusing on one role and building capacity in that role is the way forward. I think it's a mistake to think of this as limiting what they do. Just as in state and federal government, you can't be the governor and a member of the legislature and on the state Supreme Court all at the same time. So I think that members get confused by that, or kind of confuse limiting of roles at the same time. We're not saying you can't do other roles at another time, or that that's valuable, but because of the way the steward and chief steward positions are defined, it's a little bit tricky to put types of accountability into that. And we have a culture, I don't know if it's just a Minnesota thing or a MAPE thing, where if someone's filling a position, fewer people are less likely to step into that. I've found that that there needs to be an opening to kind of push some people across the line to be willing to step into a role. And if someone's making sure that that role is being filled and they're doing 2 or 3 or 4 other roles, then that then other people are less likely to step in and help them out. And keep in mind that if someone is a regular steward, not the chief steward, they can still hold other officer positions. They can still participate in other things. That experience is valuable and those perspectives are valuable. But I think that if we as an organization want to expand capacity for enforcement and devote more resources to enforcement, that the place to start is with our chief stewards building that capacity, and just saying, if you're going to rise to the level of a regional or statewide office, then you should be focusing on that thing. And keep in mind, this doesn't limit people participating in things like equity and diversity council or special subcommittees or teams, or things like that. It doesn't prevent people, chief stewards, from even being on statewide meet and confer teams. But it's kind of a reimagining of if you're going to be a regional or statewide officer, like what your focus should be. All right.
Thanks, John. Along the same lines, there's one more question here from Cara Hoffreiter from Local 1301, resolution number 5. How many regions currently have chief stewards that are serving multiple positions?
You know what? That's a good and fair question that I don't know offhand. I do know that over the past 6 to 9 months, we've had more than one chief steward who held multiple roles resign. I think that overall, the number of individuals this will impact is going to be small. But I think that if we want to say that we want to make enforcement a priority, then the place to start is saying that the people who lead that for each region should make that a priority.
Okay, thank you. I think that is all of the questions for resolution number 5, so we can move on to number 7.
Okay. Number 7 is a long one. We may need to break it up at the on Saturday when we debate it into a few parts. Let me give you the background for this. And in addition to myself and Jay Smith, the authors, this was also endorsed and passed by the political council. So this past spring, right when the pandemic was breaking out, we regional and statewide officers were trying to put together a plan to just do wellness calls as part of a COVID outreach program. And the elections committee and the recommended to the board of directors that would create an unfair advantage to the members of those groups who were in the middle of their campaigns at that time. And so that cut our capacity in half. And that was really detrimental to that program. It's been difficult to recover and to get on track for that. And so the solution for that, when we talked about it, was to make it so candidates have enough access to members and members to candidates and can have a dialogue that even if an officer who is running for re-election or for a new position is contacting members as part of the organizing for their position, that won't give them an unfair advantage, because there will just be so many opportunities for members to be engaged and find out information about the candidates. And I think that you know, it would be very detrimental to our organization to follow the pattern that was set this last spring. If we're going to say half of our regional directors and half of our statewide officers on the council and executive team are not eligible to do direct member outreach during the legislative session, that's really going to handicap us. So this resolution seeks to do a couple things. It's primarily focused on expanding ways that locals can do forums, and doing it in a way that is flexible and makes it so you don't just have one or two locals that decide the election. It'll be especially beneficial to members in greater Minnesota who traditionally are not campaigned to or engaged and are frankly pretty disenfranchised in the electoral process. And then it cleans up a couple of just operational things that came to light in this last election. So I have a few bulleted points I'm going to go through real quick, and then we can get to questions. So first thing this does is it extends the period between nominations closing and the voting window opening. Currently it's 2 weeks. It would change it to 4 weeks. It asks that local forums be held separately from local meetings. It allows locals to utilize MAPE technology in offices to hold their forums if they request it. So locals could use Zoom or GoToMeeting or something on the MAPE license, so we wouldn't be using state resources. It says that locals cannot hold a forum at the same time as another local holds their forum during this past campaign cycle. And historically, it's been common for there to be 3 or 4 forums all at the same time. It says that only local elections committees can schedule forums. It says the statewide elections committee will provide a tool for locals to reserve their forum time. It says local forum signups will be in order determined by when the local notifies the statewide elections committee that they have formed a local elections committee. We have a lot of locals, more than half, that don't form an local elections committee. In many cases, this means a local officer who is running for office is setting up the forums. That creates a conflict of interest. It allows members to opt in to receive campaign materials on their personal email account. We discovered during the last election cycle, especially when everybody is working from home or working remotely, there's no way to reach members. And there's no lists or things. We think that by allowing members to opt in, that you'll only be getting members who want that email, and you won't get bombarded with spam, or you can turn it off if you want to. Candidates may have send through the Postal Service campaign materials to members if the campaigns pay for it. In the past, members used to receive a packet with all the statements and things like that. This is set up so that members would only receive one parcel in the mail. So it wouldn't be, again, getting spammed with stuff. It asks that, or it requires that a nomination form be set up so that candidates can accept their nomination via the form, and that form will create or contain all the campaign rules and policies, kind of like signing and agreeing to a software user agreement. Currently, that information is sent out via email, and not all candidates receive it. And it also finally requires that the statewide elections committee submit an enforcement report to the board of directors at the first regularly scheduled board meeting after the election is complete. And this is done because currently there's a lot of turnover on the statewide elections committee. And we've discovered that if in the past, if a member committed a certain type of violation, the elections committee might call them up and say, hey, that's against the rules. I don't know if you know that, but please stop. And later on, a different elections committee will have the same type of violation brought forward to it, and they'll throw the book at them. So we want to create a just kind of a history of what's appropriate and proportional response to different types of actions, what's been done in the past, and that'll help help us act in a consistent way and avoid recrimination and things like that.
Okay. Thanks, John. I got one question on this resolution, it looks like, and then Oops, I think my internet cut out. Did you answer?
I didn't. I just said I've got a couple of questions and then you broke up.
Oh, sorry. There are 2 questions on resolution number 5 and 1 on 7. Do you have a preference for what order they go in?
Let's do 7 and then we'll circle back around to 5.
Okay. Tabitha Reese Miller asks, were regional directors prevented from contacting members outside of their region?
Yes.
Okay.
Even ones
So
that
back-
were running unopposed.
Did you say even ones that were running unopposed?
Correct.
Thanks. Follow-up question from resolution number 5 by Cara is they're asking if you would be willing to get the number of chief stewards who serve in multiple roles before delegate assembly.
I will see what I can do.
Okay. Tabitha Reese Miller is asking if you can clarify your understanding of the chief steward's responsibility and how it conflicts with those of the other positions.
I think it starts with a great quote by Ron Swanson, who says, don't half-ass 2 things, whole-ass 1 thing. I think that it comes back to what I said previously, that if you have an officer who steps down and leaves and there's not an individual prepared to step in and assume that role, then there's a gap in building capacity, and that requires an investment of time and effort. If we look back to the debate we had at Delegate Assembly a few years past, when we made it so that regional directors could not also serve on negotiations at the same time, there were a lot of people who were frustrated by that. But it was interesting in the debate that many of the people who were standing up and saying, I'm able to do both, were the ones that the opposing side was coming up and saying, you're not. That's why we're having this discussion. So I think that's really the crux of it, that if you haven't built sufficient capacity in your region where you could step away if you win the lottery, then that indicates that there's more time that needs to be spent building that capacity. And that means less time, being on the board of directors or being on negotiations, these other time intense, heavy lift opportunities.
Okay, thanks, John. I don't see any more questions here, so that wraps up resolution number 7. Thanks a lot, John.
Okay.
So we will move to resolution number 8. Kate Pedretti, feel free to unmute yourself. If you could introduce yourself, please, and then give your presentation on resolution number 8.
Sure. Kate Pedretti, I'm from Region 20. I am the chief steward in this region, and I have served in other roles such as negotiations and board of directors before, as well as sit on the statewide meet and confer committee. This one that we have out the Speaker of Employee Rights Committee, and it kind of, if you can think back, depending on how long you've been in MAPE, if you can think back to the fact that we used to have a first statewide vice president and a second statewide vice president. And now that work is being handled by one person. That one person is both the chief, is the ERC, as well as the other vice presidential
Hey,
duties.
Kay, I don't know if it's just me, but you keep going in and out with your microphone real quiet and then
Really?
a normal volume. So maybe it's just me, but if you can kind of stabilize the mic, that'd be good.
I don't have a mic other than, just talking to my computer. So it might be a computer issue. I'm not sure. I will say, like I said, and I don't know what you heard of that. If you think back to MAPE's former structure, we did have a first statewide vice president and a second statewide vice president. And so some of the duties of the vice president were broken up. And now the vice president has many duties. One of them is the of the Employee Rights Committee. And what it does is basically assist that vice president in helping out for the most part with arbitrations. And arbitrations are the central part of why the ERC meets most times. I'm sure there is training and different things like that, don't get me wrong, but our central purpose is to be the last stop that somebody who has a grievance and has been told their grievance isn't going to arbitration. The ERC is the last stop where that member can possibly have that decision overturned. And so that hearing is awful important. And we want to make sure that each member has a good hearing, has full access to the information they need. And so we are, this resolution would propose that there be a speaker of the Employee Rights Committee, and that person would, in fact, run the arbitration appeal meetings and would sit on the ARB team, which is the step before somebody would come to ERC and appeal their denial. So that is the main idea of this resolution.
Okay, thanks for that presentation. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat here. So whenever you're ready, we can move on to resolution. Oh, I'm sorry.
Is there a question?
Yes, it looks like Lynn Butcher, our statewide secretary, has a question for you. Go ahead, Lynn.
Thanks, Megan. I'm sorry, I don't have access to the chat. So, so okay, my question is this, with the change in the statewide vice presidents. So the first statewide vice president essentially had the role that the vice president has now, and the second statewide vice president position was eliminated with the creation of the organizing council. At least that's my memory. And so that change in vice president didn't really affect this, or can you talk more about how you think that affected the ability of the vice president to serve in this role?
Sure, and I'm not. No, that's a good point, Lynn. I do agree. So maybe that wasn't the best wording I used, but I will say, to kind of address what you're saying, is the statewide vice president doesn't need to be a former chief steward. And I've been a chief steward at 2 different points in my 20 years during MAPE involvement, and quite honestly, the vice president, or in previous times, the first vice president, was not necessarily, and rarely, in fact, a chief steward, a former chief steward. And so doesn't have the experience, knowledge of how that arbitration appeal really works. And I think those of us who have been chief stewards for a while know that that's an important part for a member. I mean, if you have a grievance, you've been denied arbitration, you want that hearing to go well. So it's an important thing. And the other thing to think about too is the ERC is the only statewide committee that doesn't select its own chair. And so this would give them opportunity to have a say in some leadership kind of roles on the ERC and not just be assigned a person who happened to win an election. I think that's important. Chief stewards know what they're doing and know why they're there, and really, really want to have some leadership in this as well.
Okay, thanks, Kay. Cara H. from Local 1301 asks, it seems that Resolution 8 is in conflict with Resolution 5. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I guess, as you probably heard in the comments that Megan read, I'm not in support of Resolution 5. I don't think it actually is the solution to our problem, and we do have a problem at MAPE right now with enforcement. I don't think it is the solution. I am a chief steward, so somebody had asked for a tally of who or how many chief stewards have dual roles. And I'm one of those. I can probably name 6 others. So maybe half of us do. I mean, if I had to take a guess at it. And I don't think it limits what I can do as chief steward. I think it actually enhances
Hey, Kay,
what I can do.
I want to make
Yep.
sure that we're not debating the merits of any of the resolutions here. So can you just speak to whether 8 is in conflict with Resolution 5, please?
I don't feel it is. I think they're two very different ideas, and I don't think they're in conflict at all. They're 2 different ideas. I get that point, and maybe that's why you're thinking they're in conflict. But they're 2 different ways of looking at it. I don't think they're in conflict with each other. They're 2 different ideas.
Okay, thank you. Joe asks a 2-part question. First, the executive committee has gone from 5 to, with this change, 9 people. He asks, is this too large? And then I only ask this because I'm not familiar with the inner workings of the executive committee. Also, what is your opinion on having indirectly elected chairs on the executive committee?
If this resolution passes as is, it would add a person to the executive committee. And if Lynn scrolls all the way down, it does say that. I think it says that in error, to be honest with you. It was, when I first started writing this resolution, we were looking at adding this person to the executive committee. And I think, honestly, I just didn't delete that part. So I am completely open to amendments for that. But I would say if we choose to keep it, the reason I first put it there has to do with the fact that all the different main bodies of MAPE are represented on the executive committee except enforcement. And so that is an issue and maybe could lead to some resolution of some of our issues related to enforcement. Joe's second question, I'm sorry, had to do with what, Megan? I'm sorry.
Yeah, he says also, what is your opinion on having indirectly elected chairs on the executive committee?
I think that the executive committee is unique in the fact that obviously the president, I would guess, is the chair of the executive committee and has been elected by the membership. And so while not perfect, it is the only committee at MAPE, in my opinion, that should have an elected outside, elected from the outside chair of the committee.
You mean the ERC, right?
No, well, the ERC is in that group right now. The ERC and the executive committee both have both have somebody appointed as the chair of the committee. The executive committee would have the president appointed as the chair of that executive committee, and the ERC has the vice president appointed as the chair of the ERC.
Yep. So just to confirm, you're proposing that the speaker of the meet and confer would be, or sorry, the speaker of the ERC would be elected by the chief stewards who sit on the ERC, but you're not proposing that the chair of the executive committee would be elected by the committee members, the executive committee members?
Yeah, I don't see where I say that.
Okay. No, I don't either.
Okay.
I'm just confirming.
If I do,
Fact-checking.
I certainly didn't need to, but I don't see where I would have said that. So
No, I was just
Okay.
confirming. Okay, thanks. That's Joe's question. Tabitha Reese Miller has a question. Go ahead, Tabitha.
I actually just have a clarification. I think Joe is asking if the speaker of the ERC sits on the executive committee, that speaker is actually not elected from a statewide point of view. And so is it appropriate to have someone who's not a statewide elected sit on the executive committee is what I'm understanding the question to be. And that already happens. The speaker of the organizing council the chair of the organizing council and the chair of the political council are both selected by members elected to the political council and organizing council and not actually elected from a statewide election.
exactly. Okay. If that's the question, yes, Tabitha is 100% right. And maybe I just didn't understand the question.
Okay, thank you, Tabitha. Lynn Butcher has a question for you, Kay. Go ahead, Lynn.
Okay, I'm kind of coming back to that, the role of the vice president. If you look in the bylaws, the role of the vice president really is as chair of the ERC, as well as, to serve in a backup capacity for the president. Given that each of the statewide officers has a specific role, what would the impact of this have on really the purpose or role of the vice president in the organization?
Well, I think the vice president, as you said, Lynn, does back up the president, and that takes some time. And I think what this would assist with, I think, is making sure that the ERC has regular communication and knows what's going on. I guess I'll put it that way. I think that's important. I think I think that it's really important that there be some sort of backup, if you will, for the vice president on the ERC, somebody who's more knowledgeable about the processes. Again, if you haven't sat on the ERC and been a chief steward, I think I will just say my first few meetings in my first years as chief steward long ago were very time consuming and a big learning curve. And I think it's important that we give our members the full benefit of what an appeal means. I'm not saying that the vice president would not have a role on the ERC. In fact, they technically would still be the chair. The speaker of the ERC would be the person who chairs the arbitration appeals. And I really think that's an important part of our process that we want to make sure is done fairly.
Okay, thanks, Kay. One comment from John Ferrara is that the chair is still elected to the council, so he's referring to the political and organizing councils by a statewide election. I have believed that this resolution, a 2/3 majority to add a person to the executive committee, so it would require a constitutional change. I wondered have you thought about that?
I have not, but yeah, I'm certainly open to amendments and other thoughts about it.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other open questions in the Q&A. So let's move on quickly. We've got 1 minute left, so let's power through resolution number 9, please.
Yes, resolution number 9 is a simple replacement of a word in all documents where regional chief steward would be replaced with regional lead steward. And the reasoning behind that would just be getting rid of possibly offensive language. There are some city councils in Minnesota and other states who have done that. I sit in Minnesota State as an agency, and we have removed chief from all of our diversity officers. And that happened this summer, and that was kind of the impetus behind this particular resolution. It seemed like if we can get behind removing chief, it just would have less possible marginalizing kind of language out there.
Thanks, Kay, for being brief there. Quick. There is one question from Tim Jenkins about resolution number 8. He's asking, how would this change strengthen the voice of members in decision making?
I think it would change for members. I think it would particularly change for those people who are stewards. And so I think they would have more of a voice in some of the things that are happening and or maybe not happening right now.
Okay, thank you. I want to make a note here before we wrap up that we are down one member on our credentials committee. So if someone would be willing to serve on that for delegate assembly, their role is to check in members, delegates and alternates and make sure that folks are put in the right place for voting purposes. And given that this is completely virtual, it'd be really great to have that credentials committee full. So we're looking for one more person who would be willing to serve in that capacity. And I think training will take place tomorrow, maybe over the lunch hour, I think. We can confirm if folks are interested, but it'd be really great to have that seat filled. So if you are interested or you know anyone who's interested, you can give me an email or you can shoot Paul Schweizer an email as well.
Again, training is Friday at 2 o'clock at the MAPE building.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks to everyone for joining us, for spending your lunch hour with us on a Wednesday. This was really great to put together these Q&A forums so we can bounce some ideas off each other before we actually go into DA on Saturday. Given that it's a virtual format, might be a little bumpy, but we will get through it. And this Q&A forum has helped us be prepared for that. So thanks to everybody for joining, and reminder to check the resolutions on the website or on the portal and reach out to the chief authors if you have questions. And otherwise, we will see you on Saturday morning, bright and early. Thanks, everyone. Okay, thanks, Davia and Lynn. I think we can just end the webinar.
Okay, thanks, Megan. Nice job.
Thank you.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.